In my last video, I checked out Robotech Battlecry, a game that seemed to have a whole lot of memories for some, but ultimately nostalgia didn't exactly win the day in that case. Simply put, its flaws greatly outweighed what good was to be had, and completely warping the Robotech lore just seemed like a big misfire in my opinion, even for someone who really wasn't familiar with the franchise at the time. Now, you'd think that Battlecry would be the end of it, especially considering less than spectacular sales and a lukewarm reception from press. But no, Vicious Cycle decided that yeah, they'd already flubbed up the Robotech franchise with their own iteration of the story and art, so why not move on to Robotech, the new generation? Before I go too far with this review, I have to state that I just really wonder why Vicious Cycle was obsessed with warping the Robotech franchise. There were a handful of Macross titles that could have easily been translated over, more of them more competent than these Franken games that they'd end up producing. No matter if the intention was to make money or revitalize the Robotech franchise, they failed on both fronts. So what exactly the end game was with this series, I really don't know, and I can't hope to guess. Now, seeing these games side by side, you'd struggle to think that they were sequels, but yes, they apparently are. The developers even put a subtle reference into the ending of Battlecry for the 5 people who even cared to catch it. Though in all honesty, I'm not exactly sure this would constitute a connection, despite the developers' claims. A simple Easter egg just doesn't feel like enough to connect an experience that feels so wholly different. Whereas Battlecry stripped a good deal of Robotech's anime roots, Invasion does away with the ties to animation just about completely. As with the first game, the reasons for this seem to have been lost with time, but I will say that the overhaul really isn't too bad at all. This time around, it does have a lot more detail, with just about every aspect of the game being improved visually, but perhaps at the expense of variety, as most every human in this game is a set of models repurposed over and over and over again.
It's starting to mess with your mind. El Loco, you know what I'm saying?
Enemy designs and animations are certainly far more interesting than the previous game as well. Rather than acting as mobile turrets, enemies block, dodge, and show some urgency in combat for once. The developers have also taken an additional step by adding destroyable body parts and weak points. Of course, this only applies to the alien enemies. Everything that's human in this game just stands there dumbly and gets shot at. To address the elephant in the room, yes, this game is a first-person shooter, clearly, as you can see. Due to the game being released when Halo was very popular, there is a lot of comparisons being drawn to this, or calling it straight up a Halo clone. Besides it being a first-person shooter and having colorful alien enemies, there really is no similarities here. Both games have a very different feel to them, especially with movement and shooting, and while there are moments of exploration in the Halo games, Invasion has a whole lot more of it. Now, the prospect of exploring these games and the locations further does seem appealing, but I'm going to tell you right now that it amounts to absolutely nothing.
It's settled then. From this day forward, we'll be known as the Farthing Anti-Invid League.
Wait, our group is called Fail?
Don't ruin the moment, dude.
You can basically travel around encampments and hear conversations with characters that have question marks over their head. It seems like side quests at first, but it really isn't, it's just events. They can be a bit entertaining though, as they do lead to some wacky moments, especially when the same NPCs gathered and they're all talking about something ridiculous. It's a bit self-referential, and I suppose that it's a nice bit of world building as well. Of course, despite the complete butchering of the Robotech lore, there is some voice actors hidden in these conversations from the original television series. And that's good, I guess.
I've been thinking of joining their group. A life of crime has to be more fun than life in this dump.
Most of the game takes place in some of the most painfully generic areas possible. Levels are dead typical, ranging from barren deserts, war-torn towns, or forests and snowy fields. It's the same generic biomes that have been in gaming since the dawn of time, so don't expect to be too surprised here, and especially with the alien areas, which are all the same dark, samey purple texture, which is another comparison to Halo, I suppose.
If anyone has a spare Xbox controller, I accidentally broke mine, and also if anyone has a spare Xbox, I would be interested in that as well.
The main gimmick of Invasion's gameplay is your ability to transform into a motorcycle. On paper, it seems really cool, but seeing as even big budgeted games like Grand Theft Auto at the time could barely get motorcycles to work competently, I'm sure you know what to expect here.
Presence here is multiplied since last night. Silas, we'll cover you. Stay hidden.
Even if the handling was perfect, driving around in Invasion doesn't have any real use aside from getting you from point A to B, if that area happens to be devoid of enemies. Zooming past them is almost never an option, as in this mode your armor can't protect you because you're literally riding on it, leading you to die every time you try to zip past combat sections. It isn't that the bike mechanic is implemented badly exactly, it's just that the game isn't really designed around it. It works as it should, or at least as expected, but areas in the game aren't designed to complement the Cyclone bike mode. An example is the beginning area, which is a sandy wasteland connected by tunnels. Ideally, this should be the perfect open area to use something like this, however the game does not allow you to use your bike mode in any of the empty long tunnel areas, leading to tons and tons of walking.
When your Cyclone is in an enclosed area, the safety system kicks in. It'll prevent you from transforming until you get back out into the open. Not that you want to use the cycle mode in a tight space anyway, but just so you know.
The thing is, these long stretches are the perfect areas to use something like a bike. I thought maybe these sections were put there to mask loading, but even enemies will pop up in some of them. Now it could be that that still is the case and these are used to mask loading, but it just doesn't come off that way to me. And to be completely honest, I really don't think that these areas, or the entire game for that matter, was actually designed with the bike mode in mind originally. There is a highway area in this game where you can drive just a little bit from point A to B, but you still have to stop in order to fight. This is the first and one of the only areas that seem to be specifically designed for this. Everything else is designed in cramped little corridors or open areas where there's just too much things going on. So yet again, Vicious Cycle has failed to implement one of the necessary tropes of the Robotech franchise. You'd think that the first thing they would do is design levels that were able to use these extra modes, and they just don't seem to ever do it. Yet, even more confusingly, all the mechanics are there, the environments are just completely broken.
You blew it.
I haven't brought up the actual gunplay so much because it's pretty much dead simple and basic. Everything here is solid, but there's nothing really spectacular to mention. Now you can only hold 2 weapons, but you can't let go of your default, so in actuality you can only hold 1 weapon, at least optionally. Your main weapon gets upgraded as the story progresses, but if you like the way it performs initially, be ready for that to change completely. Frustratingly, all the upgrades it receives change how it performs, so it goes from being a pistol to a rifle to an automatic. You can see where I'm going here. Everything secondary is just your standard machine gun, shotgun, and they perform well enough, but they run out of ammo fairly quickly. Alright, so I saved the story for last. The story of Robotech Invasion is actually somewhat better than the first. Here you're basically a soldier that's been hinted to have fallen from the sky after disappearing 4 months prior. The lore here is taken from the series Robotech The Next Generation, so the bikes in that aren't actually a significant change, they're a feature of that series. As are the Invids, the alien threat, so Vicious Cycle hasn't really mucked with things too much when it comes to that. The reason I would say this game's story is better than Robotech Battlecry is because the story isn't exposition and it's just completely ridiculous. Being a character with amnesia and a silent protagonist, because of course every game around this time had a silent protagonist, your character can't talk. So there are a ton of story concessions made, including the fact that your character is given a name strictly because he's wearing the uniform of a fallen soldier.
Well, this guy's name was Locke. I guess you're taking his armor and his name for now.
Characters completely assume everything you say and assume you're someone else through this whole entire experience. The best and most annoying part being all those interactions with Guppy, who just seems completely airheaded and out of place in a giant war zone.
Here, and oh, these connect up on the other side. That'll work.
Of course, there's a lot of other stuff going on, including this huge plot where you're somehow tied to the Invid and some black soldier dude. And I mean that as in his armor's black, by the way. Everything not told to you directly by a character or NPC is told in hazy flashbacks that seem to stop the gameplay completely.
He shall go forth and learn their ways.
I will watch over him, my queen.
The story they tell is very obvious, and from the start you can pretty much guess where it's going. I don't want to give away spoilers because I'm gonna guess some people still want to play this game just out of curiosity, or maybe they want to enjoy it based on the screams I've shown, but really it leads up to exactly where you think.
I'd rather die than end up in one of those Invid slave camps, or worse yet, in one of those hives. I don't even want to think about what goes on in those places.
Another feature that was probably very short-lived but interesting at the time was the fact that this game did feature an online multiplayer mode. This is a first-person shooter, so when it was active it was probably somewhat fun. Of course, as someone who did have a PlayStation 2 and knew how limited and difficult it was to play online at the time, I can't see this being very active or big at the time, especially considering this game bombed. However, if you were one of those people that did manage to play this online, please let me know what it was like in the comments. I'm genuinely curious. Robotech Invasion is a confusing game where it has a lot of problems, but is it ultimately bad? Really, it's not. It's still solid, like I've said several times, and it certainly doesn't have all the frustrations of the first entry. Gameplay is passable, and it's enough to keep you entertained, but maybe at times it's a little too easy. Honestly, it is so hard to recommend this game, but at the same time I can recommend it because it's a really solid PS2 first-person shooter, and those were kind of hard to come by. There is an Xbox version of this, but when it came to FPS games, I highly doubt Xbox players were playing Robotech Invasion over something like Halo or Halo 2. So anyhow, do I recommend this game? Well, that's hard to say. If you're a fan of the first, you probably won't like this. But if you want a more boots on the ground experience when it comes to Robotech, well, this is it. So to bring this long-winded conclusion to its close, I will give this game a final verdict of pick it up at your own risk. This has been Kei-Nova again. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe to support the channel, and I will see you next video.